Welcome to Product AMA, your daily online Ask Me Anything. We started Product AMA to give those passionate or curious about product management a daily break, something to look forward to. The format is 1 hour in length, weekdays at 3 p.m. Eastern. The first 30 minutes will always be a guest and a featured topic. The last 30 minutes is devoted to you, the audience, to ask your questions.
Our topic for today, and I'm really excited for this one, is a journey to the inside out of product growth. And taking us on this journey, we have Moe Ali, who is a well-known product leader in the community here in Toronto. He has previously been in the director of product management for growth at Loblaw Digital, and is now starting up by building an exciting product, which will be launched soon. Moe, thanks for joining us today. Why don't you introduce yourself to our audience?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Rhythm, for hosting this. And this is a topic I'm really passionate about. So I'm excited that you asked me to do this. So in terms of my experience, I've done product management for about 10 years. I started my career at Bell, which is a large company in Canada. I felt that Bell was great, but it was a bit slow for me in terms of how fast the company moved. Left Bell to launch my first startup, which was a two-sided marketplace. After that, I got really lucky. I joined Loblaw Digital. So Loblaw was this massive company was starting this 100-person startup to run all of their online businesses. And I got placed on the online grocery business. So I was one of the first product managers on the business, helped to launch and scale that from about $40 million to $200 million. Left, worked as a director at a B2B company, and then came back to Loblaw Digital as director of growth, and now it's $1 billion business. So, and I left in December to launch a new product, but it's been really exciting seeing something go from nothing, but really just starting out, to $1 billion business as it is now. So it's been an exciting part of the career.
Awesome. I have been following Loblaw Digital ever since I came to Toronto, and I've seen the growth, and it's been exponential and amazing to see all those product managers working behind the scenes. All right, let's get started with the Q&A. So I would like to start the AMA by asking about your journey in product management, focusing on product growth. You've been one of the fortunate ones to have worked on both B2B and B2C products. Tell us, how do you define product growth? How does it vary from B2B and B2C? And how has it evolved over the years?
Yeah, so I think that's a really good question. I think more important than, first of all, I fundamentally believe that product growth is one of those things that product managers have to start to understand. So, there's some good, in the past, it's like you have to have an understanding of data. You have to have some sort of technical understanding of things like technical architecture, service-oriented design, in order to be a successful PM. I think going forward, having an understanding of growth is really important to product management. And I say that because every day you see more and more products come into life that are amazing. You look at Product Hunt every single day and you see a list of products that are amazing. So it's getting easier and easier to launch products, but to have products that actually acquire customers and retain customers, that's the harder piece. No matter what segment you're in, whether you're building consumer products, whether you're building B2B products, there is a plethora of products out there. Even look at the B2B space. There's a famous chart that's out there that looks at the MarTech 5000, right? That's 5,000 companies in the MarTech space. And I was a director at Path Factory, which is one small company in there. Now you think about, that's only MarTech. There's also sales tech, HR tech, and there's all these different tech companies. And so it's really I would say the building development of product side is getting easier. It's getting customers and retaining customers. That's the harder part of it. So I think really understanding these growth principles is so critical to product management, and it will become more critical going forward.
Awesome. Yeah, I've seen that MarTech map quite a lot of times, and you, apart from Salesforce and a couple of others, you can't recognize any of the companies out there.
Yeah.
All right. So just a reminder to the guests who have just joined us, feel free to post your questions in the Zoom chat, and we'll be taking them up quite soon. Moving on to the next question. Mo, when one thinks of product growth, they would typically imagine the growth funnel that surrounds growth. So, you have acquisition, activation, retention, revenue, and referral. What are your thoughts on that framework, and what is your growth mindset?
Yeah, so I think that most people, unfortunately, only think about growth from this perspective. What if you go and search for product growth online, you find these hacks, you find listicles about doing X will double your growth. Growth is a strategic process. Fundamental growth comes from changing something key to your business. It's not about these hacks or these tactics. I feel like the best companies in the world that are doing growth properly think about growth in product, marketing, and monetization together, not in their funnels. And we'll go into what the problem is if you think about from the funnel perspective. And frankly, the top 1% of companies think about growth very differently than the rest. Most companies think about growth just from the funnel and optimization standpoint, but the best companies think about growth from this exponential standpoint that we'll get into. When you think about growth from a campaign-based approach, what typically happens is, let's say if you're a company out there, you want to get more sales, you think about this funnel. To get growth, you put dollars at the top. You can throw some more dollars out there, you can throw some more tactics, and then your customers will go through this funnel and some will come out at the bottom and you'll monetize them. The problem with this is, to get more growth, you need more tactics, you need more dollars, which just isn't a long-term sustainable problem. And the one other one other really, really key point to think about is if companies think about growth from in their own strategic silos, think like, marketing is just responsible for acquiring users. Product is just responsible for retaining those users. You're essentially working against each other because what does marketing do? Marketing would want to get as many customers through the funnel as possible. But what's the quality of those customers? Are we retaining them? And often you're at odds. So you really have to think about things very, very cohesively. And the other reason that's important too is there's a limited set of channels out there. So when you think about channels like Google, Facebook, Pinterest, whatever channel you're using, those channels are not going to bend to your rules. Your product has to bend to the rules of the channel. And so it's really important to think about product, marketing, and monetization together.
All right. I see a question already there. I'll just get to that in a moment. And anybody else has a questions, feel free to drop it in the chat and we'll just come to that in a bit. Mo, you talked a lot about, that growth is a strategic process rather than like a tactical process. So what are the different types of growth strategies and how should product managers and marketers select which is the best for their product?
Yeah, so I look at, so we talked a bit about optimization and a campaign-based approach. I'm not saying that you don't do that. You absolutely should do that. But there's also these exponential growth strategies that you should think about. And there's 5 primary ones, and we'll go through each one of these. The first one is a user-focused growth strategy where the user drives your growth. And they do that for multiple reasons. They can do that for a monetary reason. So think about referral programs, right? So I have a monetary reason to invite someone to a product so I can get dollars from it. There could be selfish reasons, which is, if I invite you to LinkedIn, I have your information and it makes it more, LinkedIn becomes more beneficial for me. And the third type of user focus is ego focus. So as an example, at one point on Quora, I was the most read author on minimum viable product, and I shared that everywhere. So there's a sort of an egotistical reason. So one of these exponential strategies is user focused. So you should really think about that. Another strategy is content focused. So that's really using content to drive your growth. Now think about it. Every time you publish a piece of content and that gets indexed by Google, that is always, and anybody searches for that, that's always bringing you leads. So you've published it once, but you're always getting a benefit for that. So content focus is another way to think about things. The next one is thinking about spend focus, which is sort of advertising or buying ads, and that can be a strategy. The one problem with the ad focused strategy is that it should never be your only growth strategy, and that ad spend should never be your only way of thinking about growth. Why? Because there's a limited set of customers out there, and as you buy ads, you will always get the most attractive customers first, and you'll get less and less attractive customers, which means your spend is going up. And so if the ad focus strategy is your only way of acquiring customers, your dynamics of how your business performs is only going to get worse, because you're gonna eat up the most attractive customers, and you have to go to the less attractive customers. So those are sort of the minor models. And then there's two major models which have a much stronger mode of protection that you should think about. And the major models are, the first one is network effects, which is every time you have an addition to your platform, your entire platform becomes more valuable. And the third is brand, which is investment in your brand. As your brand gets more well known, your minor models get less expensive. So if you have a very strong brand, it becomes much easier to acquire users through either user content or spend focused strategies. So always kind of having your eye on the network effects and brands, that's really important, because they power your minor strategies.
All right. So just have a quick question here from Rohan with regards to the ad focused strategy. When should the PM know where and when to stop?
So right now, the models have become very sophisticated. So there are payback models. If you're going if you're a consumer company that is using the ad focused spend strategy, you can calculate payback very quickly. So the time you would stop is as soon as the customers you're acquiring are becoming unprofitable, you stop right there. But even in there, you can be really smart about it. So think about this. Think about it from this perspective. Let's say you're acquiring customers on a monthly plan. You're acquiring them $12 a month on a monthly plan. Your payback period is 3 months. Let's say let's say your customer gets more expensive, and that becomes 6 months. Well, you can change your pricing plan to only charge annually. So you've gone from a $12 revenue from that customer to, let's say, $120. At $120, you're going to acquire less customers because that barrier to entry is higher. However, because you have more money, you're able to acquire more customers quickly. And so really, that's really where thinking about, if you think about product and marketing in isolation, you would have never caught that. Switching to an annual plan, even though that adds more friction, it may actually be better for your growth, because it can drive your growth engine faster.
All right. I see a couple of more questions in the chat. We'll be talking about those topics in a moment, and then I'll pick those up. More talking about the distinction between regular product managers and growth product managers. What differences do you see there exist between the skills, the practices, the teams, as well as the strategies?
Yeah, so the first is a mindset difference, and the second is a skill set difference. I feel the mindset difference is more important, and that mindset difference, the growth and experimentation mindset, is really important. As a growth PM, 70% of initiatives that you do are going to fail. And so really understanding that and internalizing that is really important. Once you have internalized that and you have that experimentation mindset, then the skills come into place. And the skills that come into place are things like data analytics and A/B testing. And so having a fundamental understanding of those skill set is important. And then finally, going a level deeper is to really fundamentally understand growth strategies and how your company and your competition grows. Those are the important things. So first of all, it's mindset, then it's the skill set, and then it's just fundamental growth strategies.
Yeah, we've had two AMAs on experimentation. One was with the senior product leaders from Loblaw, and another one was from TWG, and they also talked about, a lot about like experimentation, having that culture set up within the organization and having that mindset. So that really speaks to that. Uh, Moe, you mentioned earlier about product and marketing teams working in silos. What's your perspective on strategies like establishing organization-wide OKRs, or does this help all teams work towards a common goal?
Yeah. So so this is really interesting because Marty talks about this a lot in that OKRs only work well if you have empowered teams, right? So if you have OKRs are fantastic. They're the best companies use OKRs. Google uses OKRs, Facebook uses OKRs, Apple uses OKRs. But just using OKRs isn't going to make you an empowered team. It's a combination of both having OKRs and having the flexibility to be empowered and collaborative that makes you successful. So OKRs are a tool. Really, what's more important is to have the latitude and freedom to be working in a collaborative team. That makes it really important. If you have OKRs, but you're given a roadmap of what to do, you don't really have OKRs. You don't really have the benefits of OKRs in the sense that you've given an objective, but you've told the tactics to get there. You should be given the objective, but be trusted to experiment with the different tactics to help you get there. So those two things are really important together.
All right. And there's another question from the audience here. Raghu asks that how is product growth perceived in SaaS-based model and a typical non-service-based product?
SaaS-based model and a
non-service-based product.
So I'll talk about SaaS. I think that the principles are the same. So whether you're using user focus, content focus, spend focus, or network effects and brands, those principles are the same. So there's some dynamics that are a bit different. Let's say if you have a very high ACV product, high average contract value product. So think about Path Factory where I worked, or a company that sells products that are for $100,000 annually or $1 million annually. For those really expensive products, you're much more likely to focus on content to drive your growth, as opposed to a user focus. The cheaper your product, the more inexpensive your product, the more you can use user focus to drive referrals. So to make that really tactical, if I'm using a product that costs $100,000 a year, which is a B2B SaaS product, I'm not going to be able to refer someone easily to that. The friction is just enormous. Whereas having a content strategy is going to work a lot better. So for the SaaS companies to produce content that qualifies leads, and those leads are then fed to an inside sales model, that's going to be much more successful for you than to use a user-focused model. That being said, there are some SaaS products that exhibit consumer properties if the price of the product is very cheap. And if the price of the product is cheap, then they're going to exhibit consumer property, so you can use more of a user-focused approach to get there.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Just shifting gears a little bit here and talking about tools for product growth. Through my experience, I was fortunate to learn and use a lot of tools like BWO, Crazy Egg, and Google Analytics. I'm curious about what are your favorite tools for product growth?
Yeah, so this question I get a lot, and I think tools are there to help you serve a purpose. So tools actually don't matter as much as adopting that mindset and understanding the principles, because the tools can change, right? So I don't have favorite tools, but I can list different categories of tools that I do recommend. And from a metric standpoint, you have Mixpanel, Amplitude, GA, and Pendo. For like getting user feedback. Usertesting.com is great. In fact, that's one thing I recommend for as soon as you join a company, especially if it's a consumer company, do user testing. I know that's been done before, but whatever part of the funnel you're assigned to, do user testing there to understand what the problems are. That's a great tool. But then again, really, I think more than the tool, it's understanding the mindset. That's much more important and to help you be successful.
All right. And like, I would like to, ask you one more question before we take more audience questions. And, uh, you know, it is imperative that we address the current situation of COVID and how it impacts product growth. I was recently at this Elevate webinar with Guy Kawasaki, and he mentioned that for companies, it is not the time to look at the next level of growth right now, but to hold the fort and sustain their current situation. What are your thoughts on what growth product managers and marketers should be doing in this unprecedented situation that we're living in? And what does the future of product growth look like after this situation becomes better?
Yeah, so that's sort of a two-part question. So the first part of it is looking at the current assessment. So in terms of the current assessment of what's going on, it really depends on what sector you're in. You can be in a sector that is affected adversely, which means your sales are being hurt due to COVID, or you can be in a sector that's actually doing much better. And I would agree that in both sectors, it's time to defend. Even in a sector that is doing very well, you're focusing on reliability, right? So as an example, the grocery delivery right now is doing incredible volumes. It's not a time to think about growth. It's time to think about reliability and maintaining things. And if you are in a sector that's adversely affected, there's sort of I don't recommend shutting down your growth programs. I think continue them, but don't try to take COVID as an opportunity to have the wrong intentions in getting that growth. The second part of it is what happens after COVID. I think after COVID, things should bounce back. The channels that are existing should still perform the same as they have been in the past. I think it's really about understanding what those channels are. I do think that there possibly is interesting opportunities, not just for growth PMs, but for the product managers generally to understand how is the world going to be different, and what does that mean? People are getting used to remote work. My dad, he's in his 60s. He's an executive at a bank, and he couldn't believe that they ran their entire board meeting virtually and had the same productivity and produced the same 60-page deck. And these are just kind of executives late in their career, all working remotely from their home and their bedrooms. And so, I know if you're a bit younger, you might be used to that, but that's a big mind shift change. And I think that because this is happening for a prolonged period, people are going to get used to remote work, and that's likely going to introduce more opportunities that product managers and people should be aware of to see, how can you meet the needs of the new world.
Yeah, I completely agree. And that answers one of the questions that we have in the chat box, that will the post-COVID situation have the same consumer behavior? And I think this is a time for product managers to discover those new opportunities and analyze that new consumer behavior and tap onto that, build better products and experiences for them. And that's what even I was reading an article by WHO yesterday, and the head just said that there has to be a new normal and new common behavior after this situation. So that creates a lot of opportunity for all of us here.
It takes 21 days to build a habit, and we're in the habit now, right? This has become a habit. It'll be interesting to see what happens after.
Yeah. As a reminder to all of our guests here, I'm picking up questions one by one from the chat box now. So I think now is your time to drop some of your questions in the chat box. Mo, I have a question here regarding teams again, and Jaya asks about working closely with design professionals to inform the product strategy. It's sometimes a challenge to translate goals into opportunities that deliver value to the end user. How might a product professional navigate through the prioritization of innovative solutions that aren't informed by user research, led by design effort?
So basically the question's asking, how do you work well with your designers to inform strategy? I didn't quite get that.
Yeah. So I'll just repeat the question. So it's like, how might a product professional navigate through the prioritization of innovative solutions that aren't informed by user research or led by a design effort?
Interesting. So what I picked up there is, how do you prioritize innovation? And that isn't informed by user research. So I'd argue that innovation is a very common question that I've been asked in the past is, when do you do user research? When do you use that skill set? You do user research when you have your biggest risks to address. So innovation would definitely be one of the areas that you would invest in understanding in user research. That's exactly the time where you want to do that deep user research to inform your product strategy. If you don't have that, if you don't have access to that user research, I personally am a believer of having some capacity as a company for innovation. So let's say like 10% of your capacity should be for high risk innovation ideas, which means that they're going to fail, right? So I think that's really, really important. And some companies take that to the extreme. You think about, this is really interesting. You look at what Google did. Google split up their entire company into Alphabet A and Alphabet B. Alphabet A tackled moonshots. Do you know how Google defines moonshots on their website? They define moonshots as innovations that will make your finance department nervous. So you can see the emphasis that Google is placing on innovations. And so they're taking their entire company and making Alphabet A do moonshots, which they feel are going to make the next Google. And they have a very high risk appetite to that. So I think that's something that we can definitely learn from. And Amazon is similar in that, you know, like you should have part of your roadmap to innovations, knowing that, you know, half of it is going to, or part of it is going to fail, and that's okay.
All right. We have another question regarding, this is more on the product lifecycle part, where Raghu asks about, so when we have a product that is maturing, how do we reduce churn, or how do we keep customers from switching to a new product in the same space?
Yeah, this is an excellent question. I'm glad you asked that, because this ties into number one, innovation, and number two, a lot of what we've talked about. Look, inevitably, you're going to have customers that are going to continue down your life cycle, going to maturity or product life cycle, and then less and less customers are going to use it. There's two options. You can think about either line extensions or features that will attract customers, but let's say you've maximized optimizations to that. It's time for innovation. It's much better to, the best companies in the world are incredibly comfortable with disrupting themselves before competition disrupts them. So if you have a very mature product, it's time to take your funds and resources to think about incredible brand new products that you can come and take into their place. And I think that is a trait of successful company. Apple's done that very successfully. You look at, you know, even if you look at the iPod Touch, imagine you're working at Apple as an executive of the iPod Touch before the iPhone came out. Those executives prior are going to be heading, you know, butting heads, and that, like, no, we're not going to launch the iPhone. That's going to take up the iPod Touch. It's going to take up the sales. But they launched the iPhone, and then they had the iPad, and then, you know, the iPad and the MacBook Air. They're okay with having products cannibalize each other, which is a really, really good trait of successful companies. And I've actually been in the opposite situation, where I'm not going to name the company that I was at, but I was at a very large company where we launched an innovative product, and there was so much fear of cannibalization that you know, that's not a good thing in the long term. You should be okay with cannibalizing yourself, and that should be part of your culture, because that's how you're going to be able to innovate in the future.
All right. This next question is about, you know, focusing your growth efforts for multiple user groups. So can you have that growth strategy where you're focusing on multiple segments of the users? So as an example, having better UX may be a strategy towards growing user base versus increasing ad revenues is a purely business goal, which may actually be counterproductive to user experience.
Yeah. So one of the core principles in product growth is that growth is a focused strategic process. If you attempt to optimize or go towards multiple things at the same time, you're not going to be successful. So even massive companies like Airbnb, they really, sure, at the beginning, you might try multiple experiments to figure out whether you should be optimizing this or that. But once you find the general area that you should go with, it's all in on that area, and it's all about running experiments in that area. So successful growth is about strategically prioritizing what is the most important thing and focusing in on that. And really and truly, that's how you're going to get growth. Your growth is going to come from one or two channels. And so really optimizing and learning those channels is the important piece.
All right. So we have one more question around, what can product managers learn from brand management practices? So brand managers have been focused on product strategy around competition and advertising, especially in B2C. So what can product managers learn from these practices and brand managers themselves?
Yeah, so if you recall the 5 growth strategies that I talked about, 3 of them are minor models and 2 of them are major models. The minor models were user, content, ad. The major models were brand and network effects. Brand is a major model that can help make more efficient your minor models. So any investment that you're doing in brand is going to make it cheaper for you to acquire customers through ads, acquire customers through content, acquire customers through a user-focused strategy, whether that is referral or whatever. So we should absolutely learn from brand and invest in our brand, because that's going to make our minor models more efficient over time. The one thing about brand that you should watch out for is it takes a long time to build brand, and you can knock your brand down very quickly. So one mistake in brand can wipe away years of effort. So that's just the one thing to know about. That's why, one tweet from a fashion designer and all sales in Italy are down, right? Because they said something wrong. So brand is great. It makes your other minor models more efficient, but just watch out, don't make any mistakes.
That's why whenever we see a controversial ad, it becomes a source of memes for all of us.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, a reminder to our audience, if you have any more questions, I see one more come in, but if you have any more questions, please type them now in the chat box. So another question, Mo, how do we grow a product? So essentially, how do I know what's next after MVP? What are the points we need to consider when drawing a roadmap?
Understanding how your product, I'd argue that understanding how your product grows is the single most important thing that a product lead or head of product or product manager should be aware of. So it's really, startups are valued for growth. You look at Tesla, it's valued more than Ford. Why is that? It's valued because of its growth. If they're valued to do their sales, they would be the least valuable company. So let's put into place that growth is fundamentally the most important thing, especially for startup. And I'm assuming people here are in the startup world. So understanding how your product grows is absolutely critical. How you go about prioritizing what growth initiative you should do is through experimentation. So I've sort of laid out the five tactics. You have to experiment with what works. So you can't blindly take a tactic and apply it. And I'll give you an example here. So content-focused growth is one of the strategies that I talked about. 2 separate companies cannot equally use content. Let's say that you are WebMD. WebMD is an area where you go and learn about medical diseases. And so, God forbid, if you have cancer, you're not going to share that on social. So you've taken a content strategy, but it's never going to be shared. Whereas if you look at product management content, people are much more likely to share that. Or marketing content. HubSpot, massive. Marketers love to share their knowledge. So simply taking a strategy, you have to understand how does that apply to me? You cannot blindly take a strategy and apply. You have to experiment and learn. Is this really contributing to my growth? So to answer that question, answering the question, how does your company grow, is the single most important question that you have to ask. And you have to learn through experimentation how each of these tactics will work for you, because they will work very differently. Any of the strategies I talked about, we're just touching the surface, but even in user focus, there's many different avenues. You have to learn through experimentation which one works for you. And guess what? 70% of the time you're going to be wrong. So just kind of know that.
Yep. We have an interesting question around hiring for growth product managers. So recruiting for new product talent in today's days seems hard because everyone is so talented and skills are so competitive across the board. Any advice on promising candidates to help grow the product discipline in a team or an organization?
So the question was around hiring growth PMs and where to find that talent?
Yeah. So any advice on like hiring promising candidates, especially PMs, to help grow the product discipline within a team or an organization?
Yeah. So going to what Marty Kagan talks about this in a sense that you can take anybody and coach them to be a good product manager. So I asked him that. I had an AMA with him a couple of days ago. I said, hey, Marty, you look at Google PMs, and to get into Google, it's really difficult. You have to go through 8 rounds of interviews that test you on strategy, analytics, product design, all these functions. And coming out of that, of course, you're going to be a great product manager. And Marty said, no, it's not about how they recruit. It's about how they're coached. So I think where you can learn product management through that coaching. So finding a manager that you really respect, someone's work that you've looked at, I think that can be a really good source of training. And I'm not going to say anything, but product faculty is also a great way to trade. I run an advanced product management course, and I'm constantly thinking about ways of making the course difficult for PMs that really put them into tough situations so they can learn from that. So that's another method.
Yeah, I and a couple of people I see on the session can speak for that. We are recent graduates. Talking about B2C growth, and I think your experience at Loblaw can speak to this. So Adi asks about how do you sustain growth, continued growth in B2C space, because the switching costs of customers are very low. So as a PM, what strategies can you make use of to keep that the customers loyal or even retain subscriptions?
That's an amazing question. So thank you for asking that. So that's a really long question. So I'll try to go into multiple segments here. So first and foremost, forget growth if you don't have retention. So you always start with a core use case. You have to make sure that your product adds value. And you're continuously working on that value and adding that value and experimenting and doing discovery on that value. After you have retention, then you can start to think about growth. When you get into growth, the different tactics have different minimum efforts to get them started. The ad focus strategy is super easy to get started. You can go on today, right now, publish an ad on Facebook within the hour. So it's really easy to get started on that. But as I mentioned, if the ad focus strategy is your only strategy, you're in trouble because your cost to acquire customers is only going to get more expensive because you're going to acquire the easiest customers very quickly. So I would say start with the ad focus strategy. After you've got retention, make sure you have a product that actually retains customers and is adding value. Start with ads and then start to think about user and content as your next, and then always be thinking, is there any network effects that we can add, or can we invest in our brand? So all of the tactics have minimum barriers to get started. The easiest are ads, then it's monetary, user focused, and even in user focused there's monetary and selfish and ego. There's different ways, but start with the easiest, and you can do multiple ones at the same time, and then start to go to the major model, which are network affecting brands.
Awesome. That's great to learn, and thank you, Mo, for that. I don't see any more questions, so I just see a lot of praises for you, Mo, and thank you so much. And it was really great to have you here.
One thing I want to say for product managers is, you have to start to understand growth, right? Start to read online, read articles online, do your research. But it's really important for product managers to have that fundamental understanding of growth, because at the end of the day, that's how you're valued in startup growth.
Yeah. And I would like to repeat what James Costa from TWG mentioned yesterday. Like, get experimentation started, start learning, like do one small test and discover what happens. Run a small test, and like when you start that, because one of the things that comes into a product manager's mind is, how many tests should I run this week or this quarter? And a lot of the essential the essential problem is that product managers don't even get started with experimentation. So get that thing started, get the ball rolling, get that culture in, and then think about how many tests you need to run next quarter. All right. With that, we'll wrap up. Thanks everyone for joining us today. Thank you so much, Mo, for joining us. Really appreciate it. This was really insightful. And enjoy the rest of your day, everyone. Stay safe, stay healthy, and have a great weekend ahead.
Follow Product AMA on Twitter and send us your topic suggestions. We look forward to seeing you soon.